Carla Bennett sat in the back row of the lawyer's office, her hands clutching the edge of the worn wooden chair. The old clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second dragging on longer than the last. The air in the room felt heavy, the kind of stillness that made the walls seem to close in on you. Carla could hear the low murmurs of her cousin sitting beside her, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts were still on the phone call that had come through early that morning, summoning her to this very meeting. Her father, Arthur Bennett, had passed away a week ago, and with him, the mystery of his will. No one in the family had expected his sudden passing. He had always been a figure of strength, reliable and stable in the way he ran his business and managed the family. But the old man's death had shattered that illusion. It wasn't the grief Carla couldn't shake, it was the uncertainty of what he had left behind. Why had he asked them all to come here now? "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Bennett," the lawyer, Daniel Clark, said, adjusting his glasses. His voice was deep but lacked the warmth she had expected. Carla had never met him before, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at the documents in front of him, as though they held secrets she wasn't supposed to know. Carla forced a smile. "Thank you," she replied, though her voice was barely above a whisper. The other family members, including her two cousins, Sarah and Dylan, sat stiffly beside her. None of them had spoken much since they had entered. The tension in the room was palpable, and Carla could feel it in the pit of her stomach. There was something off about the situation, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The lawyer finally cleared his throat. "As per Mr. Bennett's instructions, we are here to read his will. His wishes were very specific, and I must stress the importance of confidentiality. What you hear here today is to remain private." Carla nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. What could be so secretive? As the lawyer opened the thick envelope, the air seemed to grow colder. Carla watched as he pulled out the first sheet of paper and began reading the contents aloud. "To my daughter, Carla Bennett," he began, his eyes scanning the page. "I leave you the family home, which I trust you will care for and cherish as much as I have. There is no greater legacy I could leave you." Carla felt a surge of relief. She had been worried about her share, especially after the rumors had started circulating about her father's financial struggles. The family home was more than just a house to her, it was a symbol of stability, of everything her father had worked for. It had been their family's gathering place for years, filled with memories of birthdays, holidays, and celebrations. But just as the weight in her chest began to lighten, the lawyer's voice grew colder. "However, I must also acknowledge my stepdaughter, Grace Bennett, and her contributions to the family over the years. In light of her efforts, I leave her a substantial portion of the family's investments. This will be managed through a trust, with specific instructions for her use of the funds." Carla's heart sank. Grace? Her father had never spoken much about Grace, her mother's second husband's daughter. The two women had never gotten along, and Carla had never felt the need to question her father's relationship with Grace. She had assumed that Grace, being a part of their family for years, was entitled to some share, but the extent of her inheritance took Carla by surprise. The lawyer paused, allowing the words to settle in the room. Carla's cousins exchanged uneasy glances, and Sarah's lips tightened in a barely concealed snarl. Finally, the lawyer continued, "There is a special provision for my son, David Bennett. To him, I leave nothing, except for one final piece of advice, to seek the truth. He will understand this message when the time comes." There was a silence, thick and heavy, as everyone turned to look at Carla. David. Her brother. Her father's only son. The man who had always been the golden child in the family, and yet, now he was left with nothing. Carla's mind raced. She hadn't spoken to David in years, not since he'd disappeared without a trace after their father's hospitalization months ago. What did this message mean? Why was David singled out in this way? "Is there more?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with skepticism. The lawyer, without a word, handed over another set of documents, each one stamped with Arthur Bennett's unmistakable signature. But just as the lawyer began to explain the rest of the provisions, Carla's phone vibrated in her pocket. She excused herself briefly and stepped into the hallway, her thoughts in disarray. She pulled the phone out, and the caller ID read David. She hadn't expected this. Not now. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "Carla. It's David," came the voice on the other end, rough and strained. "I'm in trouble. I need to talk to you. It's about Dad's will. I think I've found something." Her blood ran cold. Carla stepped away from the lawyer's office, her head spinning from the disorienting wave of emotions that had hit her during the reading of her father's will. The cool air of the street outside didn't help clear her mind. She glanced down at her phone, the name David still glaring at her screen. She hesitated for a moment, staring at it, unsure of how to respond. "Hello?" Carla's voice shook when she finally answered. "Carla," David's voice crackled through the phone, laden with tension, "you need to meet me. I can't explain everything over the phone, but I need you to listen. It's about Dad's will." She stood there frozen for a second. Her heart hammered in her chest as the world around her seemed to blur into a haze. David had been gone for months, completely off the grid. The last time they had spoken, he had seemed distant, distracted. She had assumed that he was off trying to figure out his life after their father's health had begun to decline. But to hear from him now, especially after that will reading, felt like a bombshell. "Where are you?" Carla asked, her voice a mix of concern and suspicion. "I'll text you the address," David replied. "Please, just come alone." With that, the call ended, and Carla was left standing there, a maelstrom of emotions swirling in her chest. She didn't want to believe it, but something about the way he had said it, the urgency in his voice, this was more than just a simple family dispute. She dialed Sarah's number quickly, her fingers trembling as she did. "Carla?" Sarah's voice came through, sounding slightly annoyed. "What's going on? We're all waiting for you to come back. We have a lot more to discuss about the will." Carla stopped herself. "I need to leave. I'll explain later." Before Sarah could protest, Carla ended the call and hurried to her car. The drive to the address David had texted her felt like it took an eternity. Her mind raced with questions. Why had David disappeared? Why hadn't he told them anything before the reading of the will? Why had their father left him nothing but that cryptic message? Seek the truth. What truth? And why had their father chosen this moment to speak to him in such a mysterious way? Carla pulled up to a dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. It was an old warehouse, long abandoned, with broken windows and a rusting steel door. As she stepped out of her car, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. This wasn't where she had expected to meet David. This place felt wrong, eerie even. But she had no choice but to walk forward. The door creaked loudly when she pushed it open, and the stale air inside made her gag. The interior was dimly lit, with scattered pieces of old furniture and boxes lining the walls. She could barely make out David's figure standing in the corner of the room, his face obscured by shadows. "David?" she called out, her voice trembling. He stepped forward, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes wide and frantic. "Carla, you have to listen to me. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't want this to happen." "What are you talking about?" Carla asked, her voice now barely above a whisper. I didn't want to believe it, but I found something," David said, his breath quickening. "Something that's been hidden for years. Something that's been kept from all of us. And I think it's why Dad left me that message. It's not just about the will. There's a whole other story, a bigger secret." Carla's pulse quickened as she stepped closer. "What secret?" David hesitated, glancing around the room as if afraid someone might be listening. He took a deep breath before finally speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad wasn't who we thought he was. He wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in something much bigger, something dangerous. And I think it has to do with his old partner, Michael Foster." The name hit Carla like a slap in the face. Michael Foster was a name she hadn't heard in years. He was one of her father's old business associates, a man who had disappeared under strange circumstances when Carla was still a teenager. The rumors about Foster had always been there, whispers of shady dealings, secret investments, and the disappearance of millions of dollars. But Arthur Bennett had always denied it. He had always said that Michael Foster was just an unfortunate part of the past, nothing to worry about. But now, hearing David speak of him so urgently, it felt like everything she had known about her father's life was being called into question. Michael Foster? Carla repeated, trying to process what David had just said. What do you mean, involved? What is all this? David's hands shook as he pulled a small, weathered notebook from his jacket pocket and handed it to Carla. This, he said, his voice strained, is the evidence. It's a list, names, transactions, secret meetings. Everything that Dad tried to cover up. Foster was behind it all. And it looks like Dad was too. Carla flipped open the notebook, scanning the pages quickly. The handwriting was messy, rushed. But what she saw made her stomach turn. There were names of people she recognized, family friends, business partners, even some of her own distant relatives. All linked to mysterious transactions and coded messages. You need to get out of here, Carla, David said urgently, his eyes darting around the room. They know I have this. They've been looking for it for years. And now, they're going to come for you, too. Carla froze. Who's looking for it? Who are you talking about? David's eyes widened in fear. They're already here. Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance. Carla's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to face the door, her blood running cold. A shadow loomed in the doorway. And in that moment, everything Carla thought she knew about her family, about her father, and about herself, was about to come crashing down. Carla's pulse quickened as the shadow in the doorway grew larger. She turned to David, panic flooding her veins. He was already backing away, eyes wide with fear, his hands held up as if to stop her from speaking. Get out of here, he hissed under his breath, glancing nervously at the door. They're here. You need to leave, now. Her mind raced, a million questions swirling around in her head, but she didn't have time to process them. The footsteps grew louder, closer, the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground in rapid succession. Whoever was coming was in a hurry, and they weren't going to be friendly. David grabbed Carla's arm, pulling her toward the back of the room. This way, he whispered urgently. I know a way out. We need to move before they trap us in here. Carla's heart thudded in her chest as she allowed herself to be dragged behind him. The air felt thick, oppressive, and every sound seemed to echo, amplifying the terror that was taking root in her gut. Her eyes flicked toward the door again, but she couldn't see anything yet, only the black outline of the figures coming toward them. David, who's coming? Who are these people? Carla demanded, trying to steady her voice despite the fear constricting her throat. What's really going on? What is this secret you're talking about? David shook his head, his face twisted in a combination of frustration and dread. I can't explain it all right now. But trust me, if they get their hands on that notebook, we're both dead. You have to believe me. I never wanted to drag you into this, but it's too late now. We're in this together. The urgency in his voice left little room for argument, and Carla felt the weight of his words settle on her. She had no choice but to trust him, there was no turning back now. David led her through a narrow corridor at the back of the warehouse, the air growing colder as they moved deeper into the building. Carla's breath hitched, the eerie silence almost suffocating as she tried to listen for any sign of their pursuers. She was sure they could hear their footsteps, but David was moving with the familiarity of someone who had been here before, his pace quick but deliberate. We're almost there, David muttered, glancing back at her. Just a little further. Don't make a sound. They reached a small metal door at the end of the hallway, and David pushed it open, revealing a staircase leading down into the darkness. Carla hesitated, her hand gripping the railing tightly as she followed him down, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the concrete walls. "Where are we going?" Carla asked in a low voice, her nerves on edge. David didn't answer immediately, his face tense. He led her down a few more steps before speaking. "There's an underground safe house. It's the only place we'll be able to hide for now. I don't know how long we'll be safe there, but it's our only chance." Carla's thoughts were racing. A safe house? How was David involved in all of this? And why had their father never said anything about any of it? She couldn't shake the feeling that her entire life was about to be flipped upside down. She had always thought of her father as a man of principle, a reliable business owner who provided for his family. But now, she was beginning to see a completely different side of him, one that was dangerous, deceitful, and completely out of control. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, David led her through a series of narrow hallways, each one more claustrophobic than the last. Carla's eyes were darting around, scanning for any signs of movement, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat in her ears. Finally, they reached a small room with a locked steel door. David pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked it. The door creaked open to reveal a sparse, dimly lit space, barely furnished with just a few chairs and a table. It smelled musty, but at least it was safe, for the moment. David slammed the door behind them, and for a few seconds, there was only silence. Carla couldn't stand it anymore. She had to know. "David, please tell me what's going on. What are we involved in? Who are those people?" David let out a long, defeated sigh and sank into one of the chairs. "It's too complicated. I wish I could explain everything, but it's like trying to untangle a web of lies. Our father. He wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in something illegal, something dangerous. I don't know the full extent of it, but Michael Foster was his partner in something that goes way beyond simple fraud. The notebook I gave you, Carla, it's the key. Everything's in there. But if they get their hands on it, we're dead." Carla's mind reeled. "So you're telling me that all this time, Dad has been part of some criminal enterprise? He and Michael Foster were partners in something illegal? And you've been keeping this from me?" David's face twisted in guilt. "I didn't know everything. I only found out recently, after Dad passed. I was going through his papers, trying to settle his estate, when I found the notebook. At first, I thought it was just random stuff, but then I realized it wasn't. It was a map, a blueprint of some sort. Everything tied to Foster's business dealings, the money laundering, the shady investments. And it all points to one thing: our father was involved in something huge. Something that's bigger than us." Carla was struggling to make sense of it all. The idea that her father, a man she had trusted, a man she had admired, had been part of something so dark, so dangerous, was beyond anything she could have imagined. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. It was a faint echo, but it was enough to make her freeze. She exchanged a glance with David, who immediately stood up and moved to the door. "We need to go," he whispered urgently. "They've found us. They're coming." Carla's heart pounded in her chest. "Who are they, David? Who's after us?" David's face darkened. "People who will do anything to keep this secret buried. And they won't stop until they have the notebook, and us." With that, he moved to the back of the room, opening a hidden door in the wall. "Come on, Carla. We don't have much time." The door creaked as David pulled it open, leading Carla into a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The walls were made of stone, and the air was thick with the scent of dampness and mildew. Every step echoed as they moved quickly through the passage, their hurried footsteps a constant reminder of the danger that loomed just behind them. Carla's mind was racing, trying to process everything David had just told her. Her father, her once stable, reliable father, had been involved in something criminal, something so dangerous that it had cost him his life. And now she was caught in the web of deceit and betrayal he had left behind. "David, this is insane," Carla whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to keep up with him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep this from me?" David didn't answer right away. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously as if expecting someone to jump out at them at any moment. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to be involved in this mess. I wanted to protect you, Carla. But now it's too late. We're both in this together, whether we like it or not." Carla swallowed hard, her throat dry as she tried to process the gravity of the situation. "But I don't even know what we're running from. Who are these people chasing us? Why do they want that notebook?" David hesitated before responding. "The people after us are dangerous. They're connected to Michael Foster's operations, people who will do anything to protect their secrets. They don't care who they hurt. They just want control, and that notebook contains everything they need to stay on top. It's the key to everything. If they get their hands on it, they'll stop at nothing to erase any evidence of what they've done." Carla's stomach churned at the thought. She could feel the weight of the notebook in her bag, the small, inconspicuous object that held the key to an entire criminal network. The thought of it being in her possession made her skin crawl. It was a ticking time bomb, one that could explode at any moment, and she was holding it. They reached the end of the corridor and stopped in front of a door that looked just like the one they had passed through the earlier. This one, however, had a keypad on the wall next to it. David stepped forward, his fingers moving quickly as he punched in a series of numbers. The door clicked open, revealing a small, but functional room. It was sparsely furnished, with only a few chairs and a table covered in papers. "Here's the safe house," David said, ushering her inside. "It's not much, but it's secure. For now." Carla stepped inside, looking around the room with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. It was clear that this place had been set up for one purpose: to keep people hidden. There was a small bed in the corner, a few bookshelves filled with old, dusty books, and a locked filing cabinet in the far corner. "What now?" Carla asked, her voice shaking. "What do we do next?" David locked the door behind them and walked over to the filing cabinet. "We need to go through everything I've found. There's a lot more to this than we realize. The notebook, there's information in there that could bring down everything Foster built. But we need to be careful. The people after us won't stop until they find it." Carla nodded, her eyes scanning the room. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had no idea how deep this went, how far-reaching the consequences of her father's actions were. And yet, as much as she wanted to deny it, she knew she was in this now. There was no turning back. David sat down at the table and started flipping through the papers, pulling out documents and photographs. "I've been going through Dad's things for weeks now," he said, his voice low and tense. "And the more I uncover, the more I realize how involved Foster was in everything. Money laundering, smuggling, you name it. And he was planning something big. Something that would have changed everything for us, if he'd succeeded." Carla watched him, trying to make sense of his words. What was he planning? What was he trying to do? David didn't look up from the papers, his brow furrowing as he scanned a document in front of him. "It's all connected. Foster was trying to create a network, a web of power and influence that reached far beyond what anyone realized. He had his fingers in every pie, from international trade to underground operations. He was going to bring everything together, put it under one roof. And if he succeeded, he would have controlled everything." Carla felt a chill run down her spine. The man she had known as her father had been a part of this dark, twisted world. He had been complicit in everything Foster was doing, and worse, he had kept it from her, kept it from all of them. But now, with David's revelations, everything was starting to make sense. "So what happens now?" Carla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do with this information? What's the next move?" David looked up from the papers and met her gaze, his eyes serious. "We have to finish what Dad started. We have to find out what Foster was planning and stop it, before it's too late." Carla nodded, a sense of determination rising in her chest. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, but one thing was clear: she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything that had been uncovered. Suddenly, there was a sound from the other side of the room, a faint scratching, like nails against the door. Carla froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. David's face went pale, his hand instinctively reaching for the handgun tucked into the waistband of his pants. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently. "They're here. We don't have much time." The scratching at the door grew louder, more urgent, sending a wave of panic through Carla. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as David quickly moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. His face hardened as he turned back to her, his eyes wide with fear. "They're here," he whispered. "We need to move. Now." Carla's breath hitched in her chest. "Who are they? What do they want with us?" David grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the room. "They're part of Foster's network, heavily armed, ruthless. They've been tracking us since we left the apartment. They won't stop until they get that notebook. And if they think it's hidden here, we're dead." Carla could feel her legs shaking beneath her, but she pushed the fear aside, focusing on the urgency in David's eyes. They didn't have time to think things through, only to act. David moved to the filing cabinet and quickly began pulling out more papers, stuffing them into a small bag. "Take this," he said, shoving it into her hands. "It's not just the notebook. There's more information they won't want anyone to see. If you can, get to the safe house I set up. It's the only place they won't find us. I'll keep them distracted." Carla grabbed the bag, heart racing as she looked around. "David, what about you? What if they?" David's hand gripped her shoulder, his expression hard. "I'll be fine. I'm not leaving you. But if they catch me, you have to finish this. Do you understand? You need to take that information and make sure it gets to the right people." Tears blurred Carla's vision, but she nodded. She didn't want to think about losing him, but she knew they didn't have a choice. "I'll do it. I promise." He gave her a brief, reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before moving toward the door. "Go now. I'll create a diversion." Carla didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the back exit, her mind clouded with fear but determined to survive. As she reached the door, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. David was already at the window, his gun raised, preparing to face whatever was coming. The door slammed shut behind her, and Carla was thrust into the night. The alleyway was empty, dark, but she could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing from the street. She had no idea where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stop. The world she had once known had disappeared, and there was only one thing left to do: finish what her father had started. She ran down the alley, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to make sense of the plan David had set in motion. The safe house wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but the tension in her chest made each step feel like an eternity. She reached the street corner and ducked into the shadows, her heart hammering in her chest. From here, she could see the headlights of several cars turning onto the street. She knew they were coming for her. They knew she had something they wanted, and they weren't going to let her go without a fight. Carla pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as the vehicle slowed down. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The alleyways were too narrow, the streets too open. She was trapped. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a figure in the distance, David. He was running toward her, his gun still in hand, his face grim. "Carla," he yelled. "Run!" Without thinking, Carla turned and sprinted, her legs pumping furiously as she raced toward the safe house. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, closing in fast. The door to the safe house was just ahead. She could see it now, standing open, a sliver of light spilling out into the darkness. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the burn in her muscles as she reached for the handle. But just as her fingers brushed the door, she heard a voice behind her, cold, cruel, and familiar. "You're not going anywhere." Carla spun around, her blood running cold. Standing there in the street, blocking her path, was none other than Michael Foster himself. He was taller than she remembered, his suit impeccable, his expression one of cold, calculated malice. But it wasn't his appearance that terrified her, it was the gun he held in his hand, aimed directly at her. "Foster," Carla said, her voice shaking, but she stood her ground. "You won't get away with this. This ends tonight." He chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Oh, it already ended the moment you decided to play with things you didn't understand. I gave your father a chance, Carla. He failed. And now, you're going to pay the price." Carla's eyes flicked to the bag clutched in her hands. She knew she had to act. This was it, the final moment. She couldn't let Foster win. Not after everything that had happened. With a burst of adrenaline, she hurled the bag toward the door of the safe house. The motion caught Foster off guard for a split second, just enough time for her to make her move. As he shifted his attention to the bag, she dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the gunfire that followed. "Get down!" David's voice yelled from behind her, and she turned just in time to see him sprinting toward her. She felt a sharp pain in her side, but she didn't stop. David reached her, his hand gripping hers as he pulled her toward the open door. They stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind him just as a barrage of gunshots rang out. They were safe, at least for now. David dragged Carla to the back room, where the rest of the documents were hidden. "We did it," he said, his breath ragged. "We survived." Carla nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Foster would be back, and so would the rest of his network. But for now, they had won. They had uncovered the truth, and that was the first step in bringing down everything he had built. As they sat in the dim light, the sound of sirens growing faint in the distance, Carla realized that their fight wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. And she was ready for whatever came next.